Imagine finally feeling, completely in control of your money,
Yeah.
knowing exactly where every dollar is going, but without like complicated spreadsheets or all these overwhelming rules. What if there was just a straightforward guideline, sort of a financial compass, something that could help you cover your essentials, enjoy life a bit, and build for the future?
That sounds pretty appealing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Almost like a financial superpower. Because navigating money stuff these days,
Yeah.
oh, it can feel like you're lost in a maze
It
sometimes.
absolutely can. And that feeling of control, that simplicity you mentioned, that's really the core promise behind the 50-30-20 budgeting rule. It's a really popular framework designed to make managing your money feel, well, maybe not totally effortless, but definitely a lot less effortful.
Yeah, a goal I think we can all get behind. Money matters often feel like this constant heavy thing, demanding tons of tracking and tough choices.
Precisely. So today, we're doing a deep dive into this really fascinating stack of sources you've shared with us. We've got articles from trusted names like NerdWallet and UNFCU, practical insights from places like First Commonwealth Federal Credit Union and Ballywalter Primary School, which sounds a bit random, I know, but just wait. Plus, we have some raw, real-world perspectives from a really lively online discussion on Reddit, Sir Middle Class Finance, and even glimpses into what budgeting apps are promising on the App Store.
Wow, that's quite a mix. So we've got the theory, the practical application stuff, and maybe most importantly, how people are actually finding this rule works or doesn't work for them right now.
It really is. And our mission today is to guide you through the core ideas of this 50-30-20 rule based on these sources. We'll look at different views on whether it's, still relevant in 2025 and explore how people are adapting it to fit today's financial realities.
Right. We'll pull out the key insights, the surprising bits, the interesting debates, the useful strategies, basically give you a shortcut to being well-informed on this whole approach.
Okay, so we'll start with the basics, what the rule actually is, and how to figure out that crucial starting number. Then we'll break down those three categories, the 50% for needs, 30% for wants, and 20% for savings and debt. We'll touch on how tools can make it easier too. And then, like you said, we get into the really interesting part from the sources, the real world challenges people are hitting and the clever ways they're trying to make it work anyway.
Yeah, it's like going from the map, the theory, to the actual terrain. And sometimes you find the terrain requires a few detours, right?
Okay, let's unpack this thing.
Let's dive in.
So fundamentally, the 50-30-20 rule is designed to be pretty straightforward. The sources basically lay it out as a simple way to take your net income, that's your after-tax money, and split it into three target percentages.
Right. It's not about obsessively tracking every single coffee you buy in like 50 different categories. It's more of a high-level guide. NerdWallet calls it an ideal to work toward, a framework to help you consciously manage debt, let yourself enjoy life a bit, and consistently save. UNFCU and First Commonwealth say similar things, an easy way to plan spending, a simple yet effective guideline.
And it has a pretty well-known origin story in personal finance circles. It was popularized by Senator Elizabeth Warren in her book, All You're Worth. Both that Ballywalter source and the Reddit thread actually mention this.
Yes, and that Ballywalter piece really digs into why it caught on. They suggest its core appeal is just that simplicity. It's sort of designed to help people avoid common budgeting traps, like feeling overwhelmed, overthinking, or getting stuck making these super complex spreadsheets. It gives you that clear structure, that financial compass you mentioned earlier, when you might feel a bit lost.
Which honestly is huge. Budgeting can feel like punishment, right? Or like this chore, or something only finance whizzes can handle. This rule offers a much more accessible way in. It takes the big, scary idea of managing all my money and breaks it down into just three understandable buckets.
Exactly. It gives you guardrails, but doesn't feel like a cage.
Okay, but before you can start splitting things into 50, 30, and 20%, you need the starting number, your income. And this is where the sources provide a really key clarification. You start with your net income, which generally means the money that actually hits your bank account after taxes and, most regular deductions.
Yeah, NerdWallet and First Commonwealth initially define it that way, what lands in your checking.
But, and this is important, UNFCU and First Commonwealth point out a crucial nuance for using this specific 50-30-20 framework. When you figure out your baseline number for budgeting with this rule, you should actually add back in certain things that were taken out of your paycheck before it hit your bank.
That's right. We're talking about those pre-tax deductions, things like your health insurance premiums. And crucially, contributions you make to retirement accounts like a 401k or maybe a 403b.
Okay, let's make that concrete. Say, just pulling from the idea in UNFCU and First Commonwealth, Say your gross pay is $6,000 a month. After all the taxes, federal, state, Social Security, Medicare, maybe $1,000 comes out. Your employer also deducts, say, $300 for health insurance and $500 for your 401k. So the actual cash hitting your bank is $6,000 minus $1,000 minus $300 minus $500. That's $4,200.
Right, that's your take-home pay, what you see land in the account. But for the 50-30-20 calculation, you add back the health insurance premium, $300, and the 401k contribution, $500.
Yeah.
So your baseline net income for this budgeting rule is actually $4,200 plus $300 plus $500, which equals $5,000.
Ah, okay, I see. So you use that $5,000 as the total amount you're dividing into the 50, 30, and 20% buckets. UNFCU is really explicit. Do not subtract other amounts, like health insurance or retirement contributions. Those will become part of your budget. They fit into the needs or savings categories later. And First Commonwealth says it clearly, too. Add back payroll deductions for health insurance, 401k, and other automatic savings to your take-home pay.
Getting that starting number right is absolutely fundamental. And make sure you're accounting for all the money you're directing, not just the cash flow into your checking. It gives you the full picture.
Okay, so using our example, $5,000 is the baseline net income. Now, how does that get split in the classic 30-30-20 rule according to these sources?
First up, the biggest slice, 50% for needs. NerdWallet, UNFCU, First Commonwealth, they all pretty much agree on the definition here. These are your required expenses you cannot avoid, the must-haves for survival and living. Okay. UNFCU has a simple test. If you can honestly say, I can't live without it, you have identified a need.
Right. And the sources list the usual suspects. Housing is typically the biggest piece: rent or mortgage, basic utilities, electricity, water, gas, maybe trash pickup, essential groceries, and this means like basic food for sustenance, not fancy dinners out, transportation needed to get to work, or essential places, maybe your car payment minimum, insurance, gas, or public transit fare, and essential insurance, health, car, homeowners, or renters.
And a really crucial point that NerdWallet, UNFCU, and First Commonwealth all agree on: minimum required payments on your loans or credit cards. Those also fall into this 50% needs category. They're non-negotiable payments you have to make.
NerdWallet also specifically lists childcare as a need. That's a huge one for so many families today.
Absolutely. The core idea here is that this 50% covers the stuff that keeps a roof over your head, the lights on, food on the table, and allows you to actually earn an income. Covering these is priority number one for basic financial stability. If you can't cover these, well, the rest doesn't matter much yet.
Got it. So 50% is the foundation. Then comes the 30% allocated to wants. This bucket is all about the extras, things that aren't essential for living and working, stuff you spend money on by choice because you enjoy it, not because you have to.
Yeah, NerdWallet, UNFCU, First Commonwealth, and Ally give plenty of examples here. Things like travel, any kind of entertainment streaming services, concerts, movies, dining out, shopping for non-essentials like designer clothes or gadgets you don't strictly need, home decor that isn't vital, hobbies, gym memberships, even that daily latte everyone talks about.
Yes, the infamous latte, the poster child for the wants category. So this is the part of the budget that lets you actually enjoy life a bit.
And it's important. Some folks on Reddit make a good point. Trying to cut everything fun out for too long can just lead to burnout. It can actually sabotage your budget. So the 30% is about balance, enjoyment, but fundamentally, it is discretionary. If money got tight, this is the first category you'd look at for potential cuts.
Which brings us to the last 20%, savings and debt repayment. This slice is specifically for building your financial future, increasing your net worth.
Exactly. Sources like NerdWallet, UNFCU, First Commonwealth, and Ally define this as money devoted to paying down debt and creating a financial cushion, or simply building for the future.
And the examples they give include things like starting or growing an emergency fund, that vital safety net, saving for retirement, maybe in accounts beyond what's automatically taken out, like an IRA. And this is important, paying off debt principal above the minimum required payment.
That distinction is really key. The minimum payment on your debt, that's a need in the 50%. Any extra amount you throw at the principal to pay it down faster, that goes here in the 20% savings debt category. First Commonwealth really emphasizes how crucial this bucket is. It's where financial growth and security really happen. It helps you reach future goals like buying a house or achieving financial independence, and ultimately just gives you more peace of mind.
Okay, so the classic setup is 50% for the absolute must-haves, 30% for the enjoyable but optional stuff, and 20% for getting ahead financially through saving and extra debt payments. It sounds deceptively simple when you lay it out like that.
Well, that's its strength, right? Its
Huh.
simplicity. Gives you a very clear mental model, a place to start.
Okay, so we get the rule, we get the categories,
Yeah.
but how do you actually do it? How do you apply this to your own money? The sources give some pretty clear steps.
Yeah. First Commonwealth actually lays it out nicely, sort of a four-step process. Step one, calculate your after-tax income. And remember to use that broader definition we talked about. Add back things like health insurance premiums and 401k contributions. Both UNFCU and First Commonwealth really hammer home getting that starting number right.
Right, that's the total pie you're dividing. Step two, track and categorize your spending. For a set period, usually like a month, you track everything you spend and assign it to one of those three buckets: needs, wants, or savings debt.
Yeah. And First Commonwealth suggests using tools here like budgeting apps or even just a spreadsheet to make the tracking and visualizing easier.
Step three, compare how you actually spent your money to the 50-30-20 targets. This is often the aha moment, right? Where you see how reality lines up or doesn't with the guideline.
Definitely. And then step four, adjust your spending or saving to try and get closer to the targets. But first, Commonwealth adds a really important, encouraging note here. They say something like, likely your initial calculations might not perfectly fit. That's okay. Don't get discouraged.
That feels super practical. It's not about feeling bad if you're way off initially. It's more about gaining awareness. The value isn't just hitting 50-30-20 perfectly, maybe ever. It's the process of seeing where your money actually goes and then making conscious choices about it.
Absolutely. Just the act of tracking, categorizing, comparing that gives you incredibly valuable insights. It shines a light on spending habits you might not even realize you have.
And you mentioned tools. The sources are pretty clear that while you could do this manually, there's a lot of tech out there now that makes it way easier. Budgeting apps and personal finance software come up a lot.
Oh yeah, NerdWallet, those App Store descriptions, First Commonwealth, Ballywalter, they all point to these digital helpers. They automate a ton of the tedious work. They can often automatically categorize your spending based on where you shop. They give you clear visuals, pie charts, bar graphs showing exactly where your money's going. They track your progress toward your goals, show how you're allocating money over time.
That App Store description for the 50-30-20 Simpler Budget app really highlights the practical benefits. It talks about logging expenses super quickly in just a few seconds, it says. Promises clear graphs for an instant snapshot. And crucially, it mentions smart calculations. Apparently, it shows you exactly how much money you can spend in each category based on your income, so you don't have to do the math constantly.
Yeah, those smart calculations are huge.
Yeah.
It turns the percentage into a real dollar amount you can work with day to day, which is much more tangible. The app descriptions also mention things like flexible settings so you can adjust the percentages, which we'll definitely talk more about, and personalized tips.
And Ballywalter's source even names specific examples like Mint and Truebill, which is now Rocket Money, I think. It emphasizes how these tools give you real-time insights into your spending habits. That real-time part feels key. You don't have to wait till month end to realize you blew your once budget.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And beyond the apps, NerdWallet and Ally also mention simpler things like online budget calculators that just help you visualize the 50-30-20 split for your income, or even printable worksheets or templates if you prefer doing things by hand. They give you a structure.
So it seems like these tools really take the 50-30-20 from just a concept and make it genuinely actionable, less intimidating. They handle the tracking and analyzing, making it easier to actually adjust your habits. They provide visibility, accountability.
Yeah, they kind of democratize the process.
Mhm.
They take the heavy lifting of math and manual tracking off your shoulders so you can focus more on understanding the insights and making the decisions.
Right. So maybe the effortless budgeting idea isn't just about the rule simplicity itself, but also about how modern tech makes it way easier to actually follow it and keep tabs on it.
Exactly. Technology acts as a major enabler here, making the guideline practical for everyday life.
Okay, so we've got the rule defined, the starting point clarified, the categories broken down, and how tools can help put it into practice now. Now we get to the really interesting tension that comes through in these sources, especially in that Reddit thread. Does this 50-30-20 rule, which was popularized, over a decade ago now, does it still actually make practical sense today in 2025, with everything that's changed economically and just, modern life?
This is really where the rubber meets the road. And the sources, particularly those real-world voices on Reddit, they definitely highlight some significant challenges people face trying to stick to those standard percentages.
Yeah, the biggest one, the loudest one that comes up over and over again is just the high cost of living. It's like the main character in that Reddit discussion.
Absolutely. And specifically, housing costs, rent, or mortgage payments, they're cited again and again as just eating up way more than that 50% needs slice for a lot of people, especially if you live in a high cost of living area, an HCOL area. Even the Ballywalter source explicitly notes that high inflation has made housing costs unpredictable and often pushes them past that 50% target.
The Reddit thread is just full of these really specific, sometimes kind of stark examples. You see users saying their needs category is hitting 60%, 68%, even 70% of their income. One person said they're spending easily 50, 60% on rent alone, and that's before adding any other needs.
Wow. And there's that example of the military family in San Diego, which we know is expensive.
Hmm.
They reported their rent is 40% of their income. And get this, that includes their housing allowance. So just their basic shelter, even with some financial help, is taking almost half their take-home pay before they even bought groceries or paid the light bill.
Oof. Yeah, that immediately puts a huge squeeze on everything else. And it's not just housing. Healthcare costs also get mentioned as a major factor, pushing that needs percentage higher for many, especially if you're dealing with chronic health issues or insuring a whole family. One Reddit user said healthcare eats up nearly 10% of their take-home pay. Others lump it right in there with taxes and mortgage as their biggest unavoidable bills.
And childcare costs, it's another huge one highlighted, particularly for young families. It can totally blow up the needs bucket. We saw that example from a user paying almost $2,000 a month just for daycare, which forced their budget into something like a 68-19-12 split. So 68% needs, only 19% wants, and just 12% left for savings and debt.
Wow, that really lays bare the core problem, doesn't it? When your unavoidable needs chew up way more than 50% of your income, it puts enormous pressure on the other two categories. It means hitting that standard 30% for wants and 20% for effect. Savings becomes incredibly difficult, maybe even impossible, without really drastic cuts somewhere.
Yeah, it forces a really tough trade-off. Do you slash your wants down to almost nothing to try and save something? Or do you sacrifice saving goals just to have some semblance of a normal life today? It can feel like choosing between enjoying the present and securing the future.
And the sources also bring up another modern challenge. The lines between needs and wants are getting, well, blurry, especially in our digital world.
That's a great point. It wasn't really such a big factor when the rule was first developed. Think about things like reliable internet access, your cell phone plan. Even some streaming services might feel pretty essential now for work, school, just staying connected, getting news. The Ballywalter source specifically raises this, noting how digital connectivity is increasingly seen as essential.
Yeah, that source actually cited a Pew Research survey showing something like 73% of Americans view digital services as essential now.
Right. So if you need high-speed internet to work from home, is that bill really a want, like going to the movies? If your cell phone is vital for coordinating work calls or picking up your kids, is that entire bill a want? It makes categorization harder.
It absolutely does. It forces you to kind of reevaluate. How do you classify these things that feel almost non-negotiable today? Are they split, part need, part want?
Yeah, it definitely requires more personal judgment than just saying rent is a need, coffee is a want. The lines aren't as sharp.
And the traditional rule kind of assumes a pretty steady paycheck, right? Like a regular employee. But what about the gig economy? Freelancers, people doing contract work where income can bounce around month to month. Ballywalter notes this challenge too.
Yeah, for people with variable income, sticking to fixed percentages every single month can be much tougher. It usually means you need more flexibility in your budget, maybe building up bigger cash buffers in the good months to cover the leaner ones.
Then there's the whole aspect of different financial goals and just different life stages. The standard 50-30-20 might just not fit what everyone's trying to achieve or where they are in life.
We see this really clearly in the Reddit discussion. While lots of people are struggling with high needs, others are deliberately going in the opposite direction, prioritizing super aggressive saving. Maybe they're aiming for early retirement, the FIRE movement folks. These people report saving way more than 20%. We saw users mentioning 35%, 40%, 55%, even one aiming for 70% savings.
Wow. So they're consciously and sometimes drastically shrinking their wants, maybe even optimizing their needs just to plow as much money as possible into savings and investments.
Exactly. And one Reddit user makes the excellent point that the right percentages naturally change over your lifetime. What makes sense when you're single and starting out is totally different from when you're married with kids in daycare or when you're getting close to retirement.
So the overall feeling coming from these sources, especially the real world stuff on Reddit and the analysis from Ballywalter, seems to be this. The 50-30-20 rule is less like a strict formula you must follow and more like a really helpful starting point. But it almost certainly needs to be personalized based on your specific income, where you live, your family situation, and what your financial goals actually are.
Yeah, it's definitely not a universal law of finance. It's more like a highly adaptable template.
And even just the act of putting expenses into categories, which is the whole basis of the rule, can be subjective and lead to some head scratching, right? That came up on Reddit too.
Oh yeah, think about a car payment.
Um,
It's often listed as a need if you need the car for work.
mhm.
But what if you bought like a brand new luxury SUV when a basic used sedan would have done the job? Is the entire payment a need, or is part of it actually a want paying for the upgrade, the status?
Or medical costs? Yeah, technically a need. But one Reddit user asked this provocative question. How do you categorize spending on a condition you could survive without versus something truly life-saving? It forces some uncomfortable distinctions.
These examples just show that applying the labels isn't always straightforward. It takes personal judgment, maybe some honest self-reflection about what's truly essential versus what's a choice. I really like that practical suggestion from one Reddit user for defining needs. Ask yourself, is this something I couldn't easily dial back on if money got tight?
Oh, that's a great, actionable way to think about it. It cuts through the philosophical stuff and gets right to financial flexibility.
Exactly. It shifts it from just a label to more of a functional test.
Okay, so the challenges are definitely real. Cost of living squeeze, these gloomy modern expenses, variable income, different goals, even just figuring out the categories. Given all that, how can people actually use this 50-30-20 idea effectively today? How do you adapt it for 2025?
Well, the message that comes through consistently in the sources is, remember, it's a guideline, not gospel. That's the vibe from the Reddit users sharing their real stories. And it's stated pretty clearly by UNFCU and First Commonwealth, too.
Right. The main value isn't necessarily hitting those exact 50-30-20 numbers, especially if your situation makes that unrealistic. The real value, which seems widely agreed upon, is just the act of budgeting itself. It's about understanding where your money's going, making conscious choices, gaining control. Like many Reddit users implied, just engaging with your finances in a structured way, maybe using 5B3020 as the framework to think about those big buckets, is beneficial even if your percentages look totally different.
And if the standard percentages don't fit your reality, the sources basically say, yeah, adapt them. Your split might look completely different based on your income, location, family size. We saw those real-world Reddit examples like 60-20-20 or 55-20-25, or splits driven by aggressive saving like 4-0 and 60-50 needs want savings. First Commonwealth also explicitly acknowledges that your first attempt might not fit, and adjustments are just part of the deal.
So, if your needs are unavoidably high, maybe you're in an expensive city, have big medical bills, or killer childcare costs, you might just have to shrink the wants and/or savings buckets for a while to make things work. The Reddit talks show people doing this, sometimes seeing it as a temporary phase, maybe while they work on increasing income or wait until circumstances change, like kids get older or a big debt gets paid off. The goal then becomes working towards a more balanced split over time.
Exactly. And conversely, if aggressive saving is your main goal, you might deliberately funnel way more than 20% into savings and debt repayment, often by drastically cutting the wants category, and maybe even finding ways to trim needs, like those fire folks we mentioned.
Walter's source actually floated one possible adaptation example to deal with modern costs. They suggested maybe something like 50% needs still, but then adjust the rest. Perhaps 25% for wants, explicitly making room for digital stuff or lifestyle choices. Then maybe 15% for savings investments, and a separate, dedicated 10% just for tackling debt beyond the minimums.
That's an interesting example because it shows you can even subdivide the buckets or shift the weighting based on what's most important right now, like getting rid of high-interest debt while still saving something. It's just one idea, of course, but it really illustrates the flexibility.
And managing those modern expenses, especially the digital ones, seems key to making any budget work today. Walter really stresses being mindful here.
Yes, their advice is super practical. Periodically, audit your digital subscriptions. Literally make a list of everything you pay for streaming, apps, memberships. Then honestly evaluate, am I actually using this? Is it worth the money? And then be willing to hit cancel on the ones that aren't pulling their weight.
Yeah, that source gave some wild context too, noting the average household apparently spends over $270 a month on digital services now. That's a serious chunk of change that could easily blow up your wants category if you're not paying attention.
Absolutely. And looking for ways to consolidate or bundle services like phone, internet, maybe some streaming, is another practical tip from Walter to potentially lower those costs. Plus, using those budgeting apps we talked about can make it really easy to see all those recurring payments in one place, helping you spot subscriptions you forgot you even had.
So adapting the rule isn't just about tweaking the percentages. It's also about applying conscious strategies to manage specific spending categories in today's world, especially when it comes to that savings and investment bucket, the 20%. The sources highlight that just parking money in a regular savings account might not cut it anymore because inflation can just eat away at its value.
Right. Ballywalter suggests looking at options that might offer better returns. They mention things like high-yield savings accounts or certificates of deposit, CDs, as relatively safe options that often pay more interest than standard accounts.
And they also push for diversification in investments, that classic advice. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah, the sources mention exploring different investment avenues that could fit into that 20% or more slice if you're looking to grow your money. They list the stock market suggesting index funds or ETFs as pretty accessible starting points for beginners. Those are basically baskets of lots of different stocks or bonds. They also mention real estate, peer-to-peer lending. And reflecting where we are in 2025, they even note that people are exploring newer, potentially higher risk areas like cryptocurrency or digital real estate.
Yeah, it's important to stress they're presented as things people are looking at, not necessarily blanket recommendations, especially the riskier ones.
Exactly. They're just mapping the current landscape. That source also brings up ESG investing. That's investing in companies based on environmental, social, and governance factors. It's noted as a growing trend, especially among younger investors who want their money aligned with their values, and apparently these can offer competitive returns too.
Technology is also making the process of saving and investing easier now. Automation is huge. Setting up automatic transfers from checking to savings or investment accounts that set it and forget it approach helps ensure consistency.
Totally. And robo-advisors get highlighted as a tech tool offering personalized investment management, often at a lower cost. You basically answer questions about your goals and risk tolerance, and the platform builds and manages a diversified portfolio for you.
Ballywalter's source also suggests thinking about passive income streams as part of building financial security. Things like rental income, maybe dividends from stocks, or even creating digital products that could fit into the wealth building part of your plan too.
Right. All these strategies, from safer savings options to potentially higher growth investments, are ways people are using that 20% or more. Today, they're adapting to inflation and maybe a desire for faster wealth building. Ballywalter wisely wraps this up by reminding everyone that understanding your own personal risk tolerance is absolutely crucial before jumping into any investment strategy.
So it really seems the power of the 50-30-20 in 2025 isn't just in the simple split, but in how incredibly adaptable it is and how you can integrate all these modern tools and strategies within those basic buckets.
Yeah, it's a framework that's flexible enough to hold everything from cutting-edge investment tech to just being more mindful about your streaming subscriptions.
And the final piece of advice that really echoes across the sources, especially from Ballywalter and reinforced by the Reddit experiences, is how critical it is to keep learning and regularly review your plan.
Yeah, the financial world is always changing, right? And
Mhm.
so is your own life, your income, your goals, your family situation. Nothing stays static.
Absolutely. Ballywalter really emphasizes educating yourself on financial trends and tools using reliable sources like podcasts, webinars, articles. And they stress that budgeting isn't something you just set up once and forget. It's an ongoing thing. You need to regularly review and adjust your budget allocations, maybe quarterly or so, to make sure they still line up with where you are now and where you want to go.
Yeah, it's definitely not a set it and forget it rule, even with all the cool automation tools. It still requires some vigilance, some willingness to adapt as things change. Ballywalter wraps up their points by saying, the journey to financial independence needs exactly that, adaptability and vigilance.
That really feels like the big takeaway from digging into all these sources. While that classic 5e-30-20 framework gives you a fantastic, simple starting point, a great mental model for organizing your money.
Understanding your real net income baseline, tracking where your money actually flows across those three big areas: needs, wants, savings, debt.
Using those classic percentages as your initial guide, but crucially, being ready and willing to adapt them based on the undeniable realities of your own life, where you live, your income, your family, your specific goals.
Being really mindful about how modern expenses, especially all that digital stuff, fit into your budget and actively managing those costs.
And prioritizing saving and tackling debt effectively. Exploring diverse, maybe tech-enabled strategies to actually grow your money within that crucial 20% or maybe more allocation.
Yeah, most importantly, it seems like the very act of engaging with your money Setting up some kind of budget, whether it's Pure 50-30-20 or your own adapted version, and then regularly checking in and tweaking it, that's what's truly fundamental for financial well-being and getting that feeling of control.
That's the real power, isn't it? The 50-30-20 gives you a lens, maybe a starting point, but it's your active participation, your willingness to adapt that makes it actually work. So considering all the debates and adaptations we've explored today, how fast costs and tech and just life itself are changing, here's maybe something to think about. How will you actively make sure your own approach to budgeting stays flexible enough to really serve your evolving needs and future goals, rather than feeling stuck following a formula that might not fit anymore? What's maybe the one thing you could start tracking or adjusting today based on everything we've talked about?
That's a really valuable question to carry forward as you navigate your own financial journey.